Kid failed you. I'm your host, Terrence O'Donnell, and I have an unscheduled podcast episode today because I'm angry. And I have this platform to vent my anger on for now. So, what I want to talk about is I'm angry. And this came up yesterday. I was talking to somebody and I was venting my anger with him. And I realized that, you know what? I can vent my anger with the world at large. I can do it right here in the Village Oak Tree. Now, typically, I save these podcasts for Wednesdays, and I do it on a pre-recorded show. But you know what? This couldn't wait. I decided to make this unscheduled podcast for everyone and just let everybody know just how angry I am because what my anger reflects everybody else's anger across the United States right now. Those of us who live on the in the less than 50% income percentiles. And something needs to change. It is going to change, but unfortunately when it does change, it's not going to be in our favor. So let me get into this. So as I said, I'm angry. I watch economists and independent news journalists on YouTube who stand up to the governments and report the actual news in the US. Or I watch news media from the other side of the world. And it becomes obvious that US politicians from the top all the way down lie to the American public every day so they can remain in office. They take legal bribes from private donors, whether they be private citizens or corporations. They take legal bribes from foreign governments, such as Israel, for instance. And that supposedly was against the law once upon a time, but apparently not anymore. I also watched a recent episode of Lena Petrova's podcast, where she interviewed Professor Richard D. Wolff, a noted economics professor, and he came right out and said what a lot of us been thinking of late. The U.S. is in an economic decline, and the slope is getting sharper every month now. The U.S. economy is sliding downward faster and faster and is getting close to the point of no return. The new tariffs against Chinese imports only benefit certain U.S. companies and their labor force, but they are a very small minority of the nation's overall working class. For example, as Professor Wolff detailed, this 100% tariff on EVs only benefits the U.S. car makers in the short term and not the consumers. The consumers are stuck with gas transport as they can't afford the American EVs unless you make a six-figure salary and can afford to pay $40,000, $50,000 for these things. Solar panels are more expensive for consumers now because of the tariffs. And this is just the upfront cost of the new tariffs. And there's so many other things, aluminum, steel, so many other things that we put on China on these tariffs because we're trying to protect American labor. Well, guess what? Those factories left the country decades ago. They're not here anymore. So we aren't protecting anybody, but we're hurting the American consumers. The U.S. still wants to be the leader in the chip industry, but can't find enough skilled labor to work in the factories. Yet they sanction and implement tariffs to support the U.S. factories. Well, you can't support what you don't have. China doesn't have these problems, yet the U.S. wants to fight them rather than make deals. I do understand some of the fear the U.S. has of China and Russia. The Russian and Chinese are working to undermine the U.S., but mostly for their own protection. They know how badly the United States wants to be the top dog, and they're fighting this, they're trying to fight this dominance any way they can. So they want to be seen as equal partners on a global superpower stage. And this has been this way for decades. Because the U.S. doesn't like to share the spotlight with anyone else, the world is starting to bypass them. Russia has figured out how to get around U.S. sanctions now, and their GDP is now greater than before because of new trade routes and new partners. The same goes for China and India. Not that they were under the same kinds of sanctions as the Russians, but even so, the GDP for these nations is outstripping the United States and the G7 by leaps and bounds now. The U.S. can't stand not being the top dog in the world, and it's starting to show. They're throwing temper tantrums left and right, trying to prove to the world they're still the world's number one superpower. Because of all this intense need to be seen as number one, their antics are pushing the rest of the world away, like kids on a playground. Who wants to hang out with a kid who can't control her temper, but is having trouble intimidating everyone anymore? I live in the United States as a member of the Irish diaspora. My family was chased out of Ireland by the fading British Empire a few generations ago. I'm marginally comfortable now, but I've been dirt poor in the past. I've had many different blue collar jobs, and I was also a career soldier for the American Empire. In today's standard, I'm considered slightly less than middle class in my semi retirement. Like so many people in the US now who are retirement age, we depend on the government for our lives with pensions, Social Security, and government health care, Medicare. And if the government goes broke, so do we, and we'll end up on the street. Think of the millions of people in my age range right now, and I'm in my late 60s, who would end up on the street if we lost all of that. So, in my case, if Ireland didn't have a worse healthcare and housing issue than the U.S., I would seriously consider immigrating back to the country of my forebears. But more and more professional people are leaving Ireland because of the severe housing crisis that Fine Gael and Fiona Fáil largely did little to avert. I heard stories that they would rather cozy up to the European developers for their money instead of helping their own people. But now, that's the story I heard. And whatever the reason for it, the housing crisis in Ireland and the healthcare crisis over there is a very real deal, and they're having a hard time getting past it. But that just goes to show you that it's getting so bad here in the U.S. that I'm even considering that option. I live a comfortable lifestyle for now, but I know that may change for the worse within a few years as more and more countries ditch the dollar and the treasury bills to trade with their own currencies. China just sold off over $53 billion worth of U.S. Treasury notes. Russia and India are moving away from the dollar quickly now. It's only a matter of time before the value of the U.S. dollar drops, which will drive the cost of consumer goods in the U.S. over the top, beyond what people making less than $50,000 a year can afford to live on. A lot of them are struggling right now just to make it. When that happens, and I do mean when, the U.S. citizens of the U.S. will find out what other countries have been through in the past while the U.S. was taking everyone's money. The U.S. has a lot of food banks and soup kitchens now. Imagine seeing a lot more of them. As I said in last week's podcast, there are very few Americans left alive who remember the Great Depression of the 1930s. Bread-lined soup kitchens everywhere. They will make a very strong resurgence when the collapse happens. And trust me, it's coming. Mark my words, if the current U.S. government keeps fighting to remain at the top of the superpower hill, the world will go around that hill and move on without them. They already are in a lot of ways, and the momentum is picking up. All these stories about the BRICS alliances coming out in the news right now, if anybody's paying attention, it's becoming a real deal, and it could have a dramatic effect on the United States economy very soon, within the next few years, very few short years. Biden needs to get a clue that antagonizing China is not a good idea right now. The U.S. isn't the superpower it once was. Protect the infrastructure from Chinese hackers and such, and the North Koreans, but let the other stuff go. Trying to protect the American worker is noble, but you have to protect all of them, not just a select few, which is what's happening now with the tariffs. Someone this weekend made a point that this tariff gesture is likely an election ploy to get the UAW and other union workers to vote for him in November. And it may work a little. But how many union workers are there in the U.S. now compared to the good old days? I guarantee you that any non-union, low-wage rural worker or even urban worker will not see the benefit for them. And a lot of them are voting for Republicans. Not that the Republicans are offering anything better, but they do make a lot of promises they can't keep. Nor will Trump keep if he gets elected again. And but I'm not going to talk about politics here. This isn't about the Republicans or the Democrats or Trump or any of that. This is about what's most likely coming for the average American wage earner just barely scraping along every week. This is about the college students who just starting to find their way around the job market with a fresh diploma in hand. All of us need to take a look around and poke the bushes to see what the U.S. government is trying to hide from everyone so they can get reelected. Biden is hiding the fact that the U.S. is in terrible economic trouble around the world. And they're not doing much about it other than, as one commentator put it, enact trade protectionism to protect certain industries that traditionally vote Democrat. This economic collapse won't happen before November's elections, but could happen very well before the next elections in 2028 unless the government makes some dramatic changes in the way it does business with other countries. As long as it keeps trying to enforce its top dog mentality with the other countries of the world, the U.S. will continue to slide rapidly into the economic basement, eventually unable to pay its bills anymore. No more oil industry or agricultural subsidies. No more government pensions. Lots of hungry, out of work people. The mightiest military will be sidelined with largely no service members anymore due to no payroll. Just a caretaker military with a Coast Guard and Border Patrol. Does anyone remember what the old USSR looked like just before the collapse in the 1980s? That will be the US once it all falls down. It's time for the old guard from the Cold War days to stand down and retire. Time for younger blood in the White House and a lot of congressional offices. Guys like Joe Biden, Chuck Grassley, Mitch McConnell, and others like them, including those on the Supreme Court, need to go home and retire. Write their memoirs or something. The U.S. voters need to ditch these extremists like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene and grow up. It's time to join the global community as partners and stop treating everyone as adversaries if they don't kiss the proverbial American ring. The U.S. needs a different approach to global affairs now, as the old bully methods aren't working anymore, before it's too late for the rest of us in the trenches. It's up to the younger generations to pick up the ball before the other team scores too many goals against us. The U.S. is now entering the last period of the global economic Game of Thrones, and we're losing very badly now. Will a hero emerge from the sidelines to save the game for all of us? I don't mean just the Americans, but all of us on this planet. Just because the U.S. is fading from the global limelight doesn't mean that they can't reemerge as a better nation with a more cooperative outlook and a better attitude towards their fellow humans around the globe. Ditch the playground bully attitude and be a more solicitous nation towards everyone so that everyone has a chance at prosperity, not just a very select few. Unrestricted capitalism needs to go away. Something better needs to replace it. Sorry, billionaires. It can be done if the will is there. Are the young people willing to step up and push for change before it's too late? I was going to leave you with that question for now, but I want to ask you also. The United States, and this is starting to hit the news feeds a lot, and I'm going to leave this last little paragraph here. The big thing I want to leave you with is all of the war crimes that the United States has committed, probably in the last 2, maybe 3 decades. Well, even farther back, because we committed war crimes in North Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and we're never not held to account for it. We committed war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq, and have largely never been held to account. Abu Ghraib was just one of many war crimes the United States committed, and the individual soldiers, the reserve unit that got busted, they were held, individuals in that unit were held accountable, but the United States government, yeah, not so much. So now we're committing war crimes or complicit war crimes in the Middle East. And are we going to get held accountable? Well, that's the new thing on the dock. The International Court is saying maybe, but everybody's kind of holding their breath saying, are we not? So the question, I leave all this with you. Do you think, as American citizens, since the majority of us want a ceasefire in Israel, do you think the American government, I'm not talking about American citizens, I'm talking about the American government, should be held to account for the war crimes that they have been committing for the last 40 years? I think so. And yes, I was an American soldier. So should I be held to account for, for what my chain of command did? Well, I didn't do anything bad as, considered a war crime as an individual soldier, but did my higher ups? Well, that's the question. So should they be held accountable? I think so. Everybody should be held accountable. So that's my point to make as I leave you with this whole thing. You should be held accountable. You should be held accountable on the international court, and you should be fired, put in jail, whatever it takes. But go away, retire, and take your punishment. So that's all I've got for you today. And I hope you enjoy this a little bit. And like I said, I'm just ranting a little bit because I'm angry, and I hope more people get angry about this. So with that, I'll talk to you again tomorrow. I've got an interview for you that's not nearly as angry as this one, and I hope you enjoy that. So until tomorrow, sláinte.